Hello and welcome to The Federal. You're watching Off the Beaten Track, a program in which we pick a issue or a couple of issues and then take a 360-degree look at it, discussing the length and the breadth of the issues that are there. India is in the middle of elections. In fact, the entire process has just about started. For the first phase, the process of nominations is over. The others are underway, some stage or the other. What are the issues on the basis of which people are going to vote this time? India is actually a land of paradoxes. On the one hand, we can call globally India is the capital of inequality, highest levels of disparity that can be found anywhere in the world. Yet, issues of personal livelihood do not seem to be mattering very centrally in elections, not just this time, but in the past also. So, what are people voting on? Religious fervor? Yes, we just had the opening of the Ram temple in Ayodhya, which was followed by several other developments in Varanasi and Mathura. So, that is one track. It all means, that are people beginning to look at issues differently from what they used to at some point? Anti-incumbency factor used to be such a big thing. It's completely disappeared from electoral debates. So is society changing? Within society, we have seen the middle class expanding massively in the last few decades. So all these suggest, that process of some kind of a churn in Indian society, which in turn is impacting India's politics. So I would like to talk about all these things to where we are as far as the elections are concerned. Is there some kind of a change in the way people are thinking? And who else to discuss these issues but Mr. Pavan Varma, who is a former diplomat, a best-selling author. If I actually start reading out and telling the viewers the number of books you have written, I think we will complete the entire show just reading them. And then a much traveled political figure, someone who resigned from the IFS in 2012, went to the Janata Dal U, and the rest of you possibly, the audiences have kept track with as to how long you were there in the Janata Dal U, then you went very briefly to Trinamool Congress. Now currently, to the best of my knowledge, you are not associated with any political party. So first of all, Pawanji, let me thank you for coming and joining us on this program. To try to understand, as I said, the elections, how does one actually look at the elections? I'm not saying, to give us a forecast, what you think, but if I use the word Lok Sabha elections, what is the first thought that comes to your mind?
First of all, thank you, Nilanjan, for having me. It's a great pleasure being on this platform and, as always, talking to you.
Thank you.
You see, there is an old French saying that the more things change, the more they remain the same.
That's right.
So I think it's both premature and unwarranted to draw any enduring inference from the state of politics we are in today. Because I don't think the intelligence of the voter has been somehow diminished. I don't think the issues that matter to the ordinary citizen at the time of their voting have changed. Yes, there are phases where one particular party or leader may appear to be not only dominant but seemingly invincible. And that also has not happened only now, it has happened in the past also. So, the one lesson we learn is from a line of the great poet Mirza Ghalib. which is very simple. Har bulandi ke nasibo mein hai pasti ek din. In every pinnacle lies the seed of its own decline. And
Okay.
we should never underestimate the intelligence of the voter, especially 75 years after democracy. When they have, even when we were a much younger democratic nation, demonstrated their unchallenged power to unseat leaders, change governments. And I'll give you two examples for that.
Mhm.
In 1971, we had Indira Gandhi at the peak of her power.
Right.
She had an absolute majority in parliament. She had India had just defeated Pakistan. She had helped in the creation of Bangladesh.
That's right.
Even by opposition leaders, she was referred to as Durga. She seemed unassailable, undefeatable, invincible.
That's right.
But within 4 years of 1971, her popularity had declined to a point where she was forced to declare the emergency to stay in power. And when she lifted it in 1977, the people of India threw her party, the Congress, out and she lost her own election. So, at that nascent stage, also,
Mm.
we had people aware, the same people who were supportive of the emergency. And you spoke of the middle class, so let me add in
Yes.
my book, The Great Indian Middle Class, and its
That's
subsequent
right.
uh, uh, sequel, slimmer version called The New Indian Middle Class.
That was in 2014.
Yes, you would be surprised how the biggest single constituency in support of the emergency was the middle class.
Mm.
Because the middle class then wanted the instability of the cacophony of democracy to be stilled, the unwashed masses to be kept away, order and discipline to be restored, buses to run in time, trains to run in time, so called corruption, the campaign that was launched to succeed, and believed that India needed some form of an iron hand or dictatorship.
Right.
The same middle class in 2.5 years was a very important constituent in throwing Indira Gandhi out.
Right.
Let me give you another example. In 1984, you were also there, I'm
Yes.
sure, and I was there. Rajiv Gandhi won with over 400 seats, an absolute majority which neither his mother Indira nor his grandfather
Anyone.
Jawaharlal Nehru ever
400
won.
and 414. If we
400.
include the seats from Punjab and Assam, where elections were held a couple of months after that, about 4 or 5 months
That's
after December 84.
correct. You're always so accurate with your facts, Nilanjan.
This is
So,
my job.
no, no. So, at that time, I happened to be in the Foreign Service. I was posted in New York in a mission to the UN. I have traveled subsequently. I was the deputy spokesman of the Ministry of External Affairs on my return from New York. I have traveled with him over a dozen times. When I was posted in New York, he came 3 times every year for the UN
Mhm.
General Assembly. His popularity seemed to be invincible. Young, handsome, appealing, a gentleman,
Discipline.
and yet the same Rajiv Gandhi by 1989 was struggling to survive and subsequently lost the election. So, why I'm giving these examples is to first understand that people may be under the thrall of any party, any political leader for a while. And there are several factors for that also.
Mm.
The first is the lack of a credible opposition,
That's right.
the lack of a charismatic counterface, the lack of a counter narrative, the lack of a counter strategy, the lack of a pan Indian organizational basis. That is a very big contributing factor to the continued hegemony
Mm.
of that party or leader who are exactly the opposite. A charismatic face, a
Right.
defined narrative with which you may agree or not, but a narrative,
True.
exceptionally strong organizational cadre, and a 24/7 electoral machine, all of which the opposition today in its fragmented and fractured state lack. So that's a contributing factor.
Right.
But one thing, please, a second principle I want to say to you with my experience of over a decade in politics, both in parliament and in the state, is that politics is dynamic.
Okay.
So it is premature to draw inferences from a current phase
Right.
that go contrary to the essential truth that people will perhaps be strayed from what they consider to be their self interest or a vote for change for their quality of life. Maybe swayed from that by an emotional issue.
Right.
You mentioned religion. But the same people may, after a while, say, I'm not saying they will, but they could
Mm.
say that yes, that is fine. But what about jobs? What about the inequality you referred to? What about the fact that 1% owns, the top 1% owns 40% of the national wealth, and 80% of the people in this country, by some accounts, still earn less than 5,000 rupees a month?
Right.
What about primary education? What about primary health care? What about the quality of life? And so on and so forth. But for that, they need another credible opposition.
Right.
Even without that, even without that, they can sometimes throw out somebody and prefer the chaos of the unknown, as they did with the Janta Dal after the emergency.
No,
Mrs.
even
Gandhi.
2004. Even
Yes.
2004, when the Vajpayee government was defeated, nobody knew that who would be prime minister. No one, even Dr. Manmohan Singh did not know that he stood a remote chance of becoming the prime minister of India. So politics is always, the unforeseen, the no, something that is not inevitable. Anything can happen.
True.
But to play the devil's advocate, one point which you definitely mentioned, that the absence of a credible narrative, a charismatic figure who stands against the current ruling regime's central figure, that is the Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and the massive resources. There's one more point, how important this is going to be in today's politics. The nature of campaigning, we are in a world where a large number of people, majority of Indians are hooked onto their mobile phones 24 into 7. People watch it the last time they are awake and pick it up and watch the mobile phone the moment they get up in the morning. And this is being pumped with political messaging in a big way. Everybody has spoken about it, so I don't have to detail it. So you have the invincible and an invisible machinery, which is always kind of, drumming things into people's ears and eyes. To what extent would this have an effect? Or
No,
is
no. The whole nature of electioneering has changed before my very eyes and your
Right.
observation.
Exactly.
See, there was earlier, the elections were based largely on poster rally. With 2014 and the 3 years leading to it, elections became a far more scientific, data based process.
Right.
Data means accurate surveys, the building on crunching of data and the building of algorithms
Right.
to sense voter mood, voter choice, likelihood of winning, and then proceeding for making a campaign based on that data information and not on your own hunch.
Right.
Now, that has become the trend. And we had, of course, the rise of election strategists at that time, like
That's right.
Prashant, who worked with Mr. Modi and subsequently he left and has worked with many other political parties and now is in politics but not as part of any party, doing his own Padyatra in Bihar.
Right.
But the nature of campaign has completely changed. Now you mentioned digital data.
Hmm.
Digital data is a double edged sword. If it can be used by the establishment for propaganda projection and messaging, the same tool is politically neutral for the use by the opponent. It's a far more democratic tool, by the way,
Right.
and it has been decentralized. You'll be surprised in how many districts, how many of the formerly unemployed with their Android cameras
Hmm.
are making small videos pertaining to local issues
And putting it
and
out.
uploading them and thereby creating an awareness which in a way undercuts the larger message which, for instance, a particular party or
Right.
the establishment wishes to use digital media. So digital media and what is called the so-called WhatsApp university
Right.
is something which both sides can use. The
Yes.
problem is that in the absence of an organized opposition
And resources.
and and resources, although I personally believe that neither the control of the media which the current ruling party is alleged to have nor resources ultimately make a difference when the people have decided. After all, in 2013, the media was under the UPA control,
Right.
so called.
Maybe not to the extent that it is today.
Yes, but anyway, it was not biased towards the opponents, but was more within the control of the ruling coalition. But still, the fatigue with the UPA was such that, in spite of that, Mr. Modi and the BJP romped home to power.
Yes.
Resources. Who could match the resources of Indira Gandhi in
Right.
1977? A party, a leader, and a party which had been in power for decades, almost without a break.
True.
The opposition did not have the money. But when people have decided that they want change,
Right. So when,
these are factors, but these are not absolute impediments.
right.
So, right now, the real crisis in Indian democracy is not what people consider to be an authoritarian or increasingly authoritarian government at the center,
Right.
but the absence of an electorally effective opposition on a pan India basis.
Right.
That is the crisis.
That is the crisis. Well explained. Let's move on to another area, which is also your specialization. You wrote this book in 2021, 3 years ago, The Great Hindu Civilization. The reason why I'm referring to this book is that we are talking, I did mention talking about the religious fervor. My very direct question, you have a certain understanding of the Hindu civilization of Hinduism, how different it is from the religion, the Hindu religion that is being used harnessed in the political theatre.
You see, there was a certain angst
Hmm.
among Hindus in the years before 2014, when there was a perception that minorities
Hmm.
are being appeased at the cost of the larger interest
Right.
of the Hindu majority. And to some extent, that charge, I believe, was true. The Muslims were seen as a vote bank,
Okay.
which voted collectively in favor of the then ruling parties and against their principal emerging opponent, the BJP. And minority politics and appeasement did play a role. There were other reasons also for Hindu angst, and they predate even 1947. In
Right.
the freedom movement, you had Mahatma Gandhi with the best of intentions supporting the Khilafat movement.
Right.
There are many people in the Congress, including Dr. Ambedkar,
Hmm.
who opposed it, saying, "What have we to do with the pan Islamist movement, especially when the caliphate itself in Turkey had been abolished?" But he continued to support it in the interests of Hindu Muslim unity. That alienated many. After 1947, when you had the inauguration of the renovated Somnath,
Hmm.
which had been plundered over 17 times and is a temple which houses one of the most sacred spots for Hindus, one of the 12 Jyotirlinga.
Jyotirlings.
Mahatma Gandhi himself approved the raising of funds to do so, but he said, don't ask it from government. So it was done on
It
that
was
basis.
very clear that the state should not be involved in funding.
Now the question was whether the Rashtrapati ji, the President of India, Dr. Rajendra Prasad, should do what could be called in today's time as the Pran Pratishtha or the opening of the temple.
Right.
Now, there Jawaharlal Nehru publicly opposed. And many Hindus could not understand that in a country where there is respect for all faiths, if a constitutional head is a practicing Hindu and inaugurates a temple which has been destroyed and pillaged
Mm-hmm.
dozens of times, but also goes to a mosque, a church, uh, 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 other places, why
Wow.
should it be seen as a dilution of secularism? Because India never ever had the French variation of secularism, complete separation of state and church. The state had to be neutral in terms of respect for all faiths. So, after that, Jawaharlal Nehru amended the Hindu personal law.
Yes.
But he left the laws of the minorities untouched. That
Right.
created resistance. Then you had the Shah Bano judgment,
Rajiv Gandhi
where
nullified.
under Rajiv Gandhi,
Right.
where a perfectly reasonable Supreme Court order which would lead to reform in Muslim personal law was for minority vote bank politics overruled by an ordinance and annulled, even though Rajiv Gandhi himself, I am told, was in support of the Supreme Court rule.
Well,
And
initially,
then, sorry, initially. And finally, you had then the BJP resurrect itself on the issue of the Ayodhya temple.
hmm,
Also, let me add, in this country, there is resentment. There was resentment, and there is resentment that Hinduism is the only religion where places of worship are under state control, whereas for the minorities they are not. I'm just giving you a background. Now, the BJP capitalized on all of this because they asserted they built upon these angst of the Hindu majority,
right.
leading with the Ram temple. And the main pan Indian party standing against it please remember, Nilanjan has been in secular decline not after 2014,
No, it has been there for a long time.
but since 1984.
Yes.
They last won an absolute majority in 1984.
That-
After that, they have ruled only as part of coalition governments.
That's right.
Whereas the BJP was on the ascendant on an emotional issue which resonated with the people.
Right.
And today we have a situation where the pendulum seems to have swung to the
Right.
other extreme, where there is Hindu majoritarianism, and some people allege uh, a certain kind of stepmotherly or pejorative treatment of the vast number of people of the minorities in this country.
Right.
Now, the middle class is a part of this process.
Yes.
It, in a way, is a sounding board for those angsts that were pervasive. It was a participant in the Lal Krishna Advani Rath Yatra,
That's right.
if not directly but psychologically.
No, they marched alongside, and
And
they
many of them marched
went
alongside.
to Ayodhya as reported. We were there in Ayodhya, also
And
went with Advani ji's yatra.
absolutely. And by the end of 2014 or the next elections in 2014, they were deeply alienated with the rudderlessness of UPA 2. What
That's
does the middle class want? If I am not sounding cynical, what it wants is lower taxes,
mhm.
cheaper consumer goods of high quality, and as far as possible, insulating itself from the absolute poverty that surrounds it.
Right.
When I say absolute, in relative terms. So, the middle class saw in Mr. Narendra Modi a decisive messiah who would deliver to that middle class its own dreams. And it's very interesting. Mr. Modi first started his messaging campaign with the middle class.
That's right. Even now, it is primarily middle class.
Middle class. So now the same middle class, it's possible. I'm not saying it will happen. After perhaps a saturation or surfeit of temple politics, may wish to have an end to this constant threat of endemic social instability due to
Right.
religious tension. It may feel alienated that some of its genuine needs in terms of its expectations have not been met. It may be, in fact, a part of the inequality debate where the rich have become richer and the
Right.
middle class has also always felt that it is not getting its due.
Right.
It may be a victim, or parts of it may be a victim of increasing authoritarianism. Some of them may feel, because Hindus are not jihadis. Nobody in this country, any religion, with minuscule exceptions, nobody is a jihadi. People want to live and get on with their lives.
Right.
And,
But
and
in
in doing
harmony.
that, there needs to be social harmony.
That's right.
So the same class can get alienated also. So
No,
therefore, I say uh, we have to wait and see. Another charismatic face emerges that has a narrative which appeals to the middle class and which promises not only their good but perhaps a more a better version of what India could be.
right.
And the middle class will change sides. After all, where this messiah arises or who becomes the catalyst, who can predict? In
That's
1975 or the years leading up to it, who would have thought that a man who has retired to an ashram in Kadam Kuan
right.
in Patna,
Galvanize Indians.
Jayaprakash Narayan in his late 70s would arrive on the scene and galvanize the people of India against what seemed to be an invincible dictatorship. So, therefore, I say elections may be appear to be one-sided at one time.
Right.
But the people of India are very mature, and they may something in a survey and do exactly the opposite.
The opposite of that when they go and press the EVM.
Yeah,
That's right.
because women power today has become so important. So all of these factors seem to come back to what I began with.
Right.
The more things change, the more they remain the
In
same.
the same. That's it. Pawanji, one last question, before we actually sign off. You talked about the Hindu angst. Now, in the last 10 years, we have seen that this angst has to a certain extent been converted into hatred and permanent prejudice. Do you fear this to continue and ultimately leading to a situation where the only option open before the religious minorities in this country is to assimilate themselves into the majority community?
I'm afraid I can't agree, Nilanjan, because while yes, your first premise may be right, and there is a new development which is the empowerment of the ultra right,
Right.
which is largely, in my view, symbolized by the largest organization, growing organization in the Sangh Parivar,
That's
which is
right.
the Bajrang Dal. And empowered by 10 years of power, they are, I suspect and I fear, no longer even under the control of the BJP or the RSS. They have a will of their own.
That's
And
right.
one of the challenges for the RSS today is to control them so that they don't take the law into their own hands and don't allow the protection of the state as perceived by them to commit excesses which then have their own counter reaction leading to what you were fearing. My own view is that there is an inherent, sorry, I seem to be an
No, no, no.
incorrigible optimist. There is an inherent
Important to
sanity.
be an optimist.
There is an inherent sanity. And ultimately, as I said, let me reiterate, people may wish to set some scores right. But ultimately, they want an atmosphere where their children can prosper, go to better educational institutes, earn money, live a stable and secure life, and not be hijacked by somebody's agenda for short term political gain. People of India have this inherent sanity which comes from essentially our civilizational roots, which goes back to the dawn of time.
Well, thank you very much. You have ended on a very positive note. And I would say that despite all our reservations, I think hope is something we cannot ever give up. As they say in Hindi, कि उम्मीद पे दुनिया टिकी हुई है. The world survives, sustained itself on hope for change. So we will hope that people leave the animosity, leave the hatred and the prejudice towards once again, in the backdrop, because various religious communities have lived in this melting pot, which we call India or Bharat or Hindustan, various names. People have different way of looking at it. We have all been together. There has been a turbulent period. A lot has happened in the recent past, but hopefully we will start putting these in the backdrop and become a more prosperous and a more developed nation. Thank you very much, Pavan Varma ji, for sharing your opinion and giving the people who watch this program reasons for hope. Thank you so much.
Subscribe to the Federal's YouTube page for more news and updates.